Good morning. All right, we're going to cover section 7 of our discussion in Exodus this morning. This is the Exodus Sunday school class through the first 15 chapters of Exodus. And this morning we're going to cover chapter 13, verse 17 through the end of chapter 14. So let me say welcome. Glad you're here. I'm glad you've been tracking along with us. This morning's lesson hopefully is going to be a good bit shorter, but if you haven't read it yet, take a minute, jump into Exodus chapter 13, start out in verse 17, and if you can read all the way through the end of chapter 14, that'll prepare you for our discussion today. Today we're going to talk about when the Israelites kind of think things are over and they've begun to exit Egypt. God is leading them out. It seems like things are going really well, and then suddenly Yahweh redirects them, and it seems like from the outside view, chaos happens, and everything kind of gets blown up for a little while. Very exciting. But as you read this section, kind of be looking for ways that things either surprise you or stick out to you. Once again, chapter 13, verse 17 through the end of chapter 14, and I'll be back in just a second. Thanks. All right, so last week we kind of discussed how the event of the Passover is surrounded by almost a liturgy of, hey, this is how you're to memorialize this. This is how you're to think about these things. This is how you're to reenact and repeat them so they don't go far from your mind. This is how you're to inform your children about what this means. And all these things kind of begin to form, use the term, an identity for who God's people are. And at the end of last week, we kind of saw the people en masse exit Egypt. They're heading toward the wilderness. They've not only been told they are free, but they are kicked out by Pharaoh. Like, get up, get out. The Egyptians in some ways shower them with gifts. They plunder the Egyptians, and it seems like when you reach the end of that section, verse 16 of chapter 3, they are home free. They're off. Everybody's excited. And then verse 17 happens. So I'm going to start reading in chapter 13, verse 17. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. So there's a couple different routes they can take out of Egypt. The most direct one to Canaan or the Promised Land would kind of be due north, kind of across the Nile River Delta area. From that, you go north up into the Mediterranean Sea and then kind of cut across the coast. And what it says here is that land was the land of the Philistines. At this time, it's probably likely that the Philistines had just begun migrating from Crete. That's where most archaeologists say they came from. The biblical story there, or origins, kind of has them coming from Caphtor, which we equate with Crete. And so at that time, it seems like the Philistines are just starting as a people to migrate over. So they probably got some settlements right there. They're probably beginning to land in that area. There's also known Egyptian outposts in that area. And so in God's thinking, it's, hey, let's not go that way because there is potential for some pretty solid resistance. And notice what God's thoughts are is, if we go that way, even though that's the near way, it's going to lead pretty directly to war. And as soon as these people have exited, they are not ready for that. They are not ready for war. This is not a fighting group ready to go to war. So hold that on your mind, because that discussion is going to continue. Verse 18, but God led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea. So instead of going north, they're kind of moving westerly. I'm sorry, not west. They're moving direct east towards the Red Sea. There's an arm of the Red Sea that kind of extends basically from the main body north. And then beyond that, we believe there were a number of lakes and marshlands that kind of extended almost from the Mediterranean all the way to the Red Sea at that time. And the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt, equipped for battle. So some of you may have different words there for your translation. When it says equipped for battle, I feel like just from reading the commentators and reading some different translations and even going back to the original Hebrew, the word there is essentially they went up as a fifth, and a fifth was almost either it was an idea either that they were grouped into groups of 50s, or that it was a fifth military column or organization. That's somewhat a common way to talk about folks that are organized, often organized for battle, and that's where that's where they the authors of the ESV kind of say, hey, they're equipped for battle. I think that's going a bit far. I think instead it's showing they're organized by divisions. They're not just some random camp, but Moses has essentially led them where they're exiting all together. So when you read equipped for battle, I don't think you should think of guys with helmets on, shields, swords, chainmail, ready to fight, and instead they're leaving by divisions. Verse 19, Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones with you from here. So this is a pretty kind of cool, significant note. And what it's reminding us of is from Genesis chapter 50, verses 24 to 26. In Genesis 50, which is the end of the story of Joseph, Joseph says this to his family. I'm about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. And I think it's pretty interesting that the text takes a minute to note that Joseph's forward-looking trust in God of, hey, this is going to happen. I know it's not going to happen in my lifetime, but I'm looking far to the future. And he's also looking back because he's remembering God has told Abraham, your people will be in Egypt for 400 years and they will be enslaved, and then I will come and rescue them and lead them out. That information has been passed along to Joseph, and Joseph is essentially saying, hey, keep looking forward. I have faith that in the future God will work even past the time of my death. It's a pretty interesting perspective to have that the text is pulling us back into, saying, hey, guess what? Moses is remembering that, and the text wants us to know that promise is fulfilled. Joseph's bones will be brought into the land of Canaan. God's promises will be fulfilled. Even if it's not in his lifetime, they will be fulfilled. Verse 20, and they moved on from Succoth and encamped at Etham on the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, that they might travel by day and by night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people. So, and that might seem like a bit of a change from what he's talking about the bones of Moses, but if you remember the bones of Joseph, but what Joseph is saying is God will visit you. He will become present, and then you will exit Egypt through his presence. And his presence is a significant thing to Joseph. And that presence essentially is expanded on here, right? It's not just, hey, there's this unique, invisible sense that God is with us, but in a special, incredibly unique way, God himself is present in this cloud. During the day, it seems like it's a pillar of cloud. We're not sure what that means. It could mean multiple clouds, could mean a huge storm. We're not sure, but there is a very visible, very present, very real, very physical presence of God, where by day it is this cloud. It's unmistakable. You can't miss it. It is leading the way out. And then by night, when darkness falls, this presence in the cloud goes from just kind of a dark cloud to a bright light, like a fire-filled cloud. We're not sure if that's lightning, because lightning and fire are kind of the same thing in the Israelite mind, but the idea is this thing is lighting up the night, so much so that the people can travel by night and see everything. The reason why this is noted so much is there is a visible sign of God's presence that is very specific and very unique. God himself is moving with his people yeah, we'll come back to that later. So I want to pause there and just, this first section is somewhat short, but it's got some pretty significant things to think about. Both looking forward to fulfilling God's promises, as well as, hey, what does it look like to have God's presence with us here now? So I'm going to pause there, and then we're going to pick up in chapter 14, verse 1. All right, chapter 14, verse 1 begins this way. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the people of Israel to turn back and encamp in front of Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, in front of Baal-Zephon. You shall encamp facing it by the sea." So notice the real specific direction here. And the word turn around is pretty explicit. And the idea is these people are exiting. They're heading towards the wilderness. They are moving away from Egypt. They're heading towards the Sinai desert. And it's like they kind of get right at the edge of Egyptian territory. And then God says, hey, wait a second. Turn around. Go back the other way. And he gives them very specific direction as to where they are encamped. We don't know exactly archaeologically where that is. We have no idea exactly. We know it's somewhere in between the Nile River Delta and this kind of passage where right now the Suez Canal is. We think it's somewhere along there. This is kind of a very watery, let's see, I'm trying to think. There are lakes. Basically it's the extension of where the Red Sea might meet up with the Mediterranean Sea if there was more water. So very lake-like region. And so notice what he says. Go specifically right up to the sea and camp across from the sea and camp facing the sea. So he's taking them to a very specific point against the sea. Verse 3, for Pharaoh will say of the people of Israel, they are wandering in the desert. The wilderness has shut them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his host, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. And they did so. Notice what's going on here. They are turning around kind of from exiting Egypt, and they're going almost to a dead end. It's like they're moving down a cul-de-sac, and they reach the end of it, and God says, stop here. Just stop here and camp right here. Be planted. In other words, no more moving on toward the wilderness. No more getting further away from Egypt. Instead, I just want you to kind of put up camp right here. Like, put up your tents. Plan to stay a while. And where are they staying a while? Right up against the sea, right? And notice why they're doing. It's almost like this is bait for Pharaoh, right? Pharaoh is going to see that the people are out there wandering. He's going to think they're lost. And then says Yahweh, I'm going to harden his heart. He's going to come after them so that I can get glory over Pharaoh and all his hosts, so that the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. So notice, big, as it were, change of plan. Verse 5. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the mind of Pharaoh and his servants was changed toward the people. So like when we last saw them, they kick them out, get rid of them. If they stay any longer, we're all going to end up dead. And they said, the end of verse 5, what is this that we've done, that we've let Israel go from serving us? So Pharaoh and his people are kind of like, man, what were we thinking? Like, we had tons of labor. Now Egypt's destroyed. We need to rebuild them. And now they're out wandering off in the wilderness. Maybe it wasn't a God that led them out. Maybe stuff just happened. I mean, you can kind of see how their brains start working, right? So he made ready his chariot and took his army with him, and took 600 chosen chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh the king of Egypt, and he pursued the people of Israel, while the people of Israel were going out defiantly. For some reason, and we don't really know why, but the main uses of horses in Egypt wasn't with, as it were, cavalry, which is men riding on top of horses, throwing spears, shooting arrows, using swords. Their main use of horses was to pull chariots, and then from the chariots they'd have either 2 or 3 men, one driving, generally at least one with some form of weapon, where somebody's driving essentially ancient tank, and then someone else is firing off either spears or arrows or I guess swords and killing people. So that's kind of the mindset, is these are the heavy-duty, fast-moving troops of the Egyptian army, and Pharaoh gets in his chariot and basically leads them all out. Hey, we're going to go track these guys down and bring them back. And so the Egyptians pursue them. Notice it says, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and his horsemen and his army. You're going to hear that refrain again and again and again. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, this is kind of the vanguard of the Egyptian army. These are the heavy hitters. These are the get business done and get business done fast group. But it's also, this becomes, essentially, these are the heavy troopers of the ancient world at this time. And you'll see these same words come up later in the books of Samuel and Kings. When somebody meant business, they brought out their chariots and their horses. And it was very easy. You see this in the life of the kings later on, for especially kings to count their security and their power in terms of chariots and horses, right? Because chariots are very expensive. Metallurgy is, it's not in its infancy, but to do this well requires a lot of know-how, and it requires a lot of money, or it requires mining, it requires a ton of resources, and you got to have special training. You have to have horses. This is a big deal. It's kind of what this is saying. And this becomes kind of a touchstone for what will you trust in? Because Pharaoh is coming with what by the whole rest of the world would think is a sizable force, can easily take out this ragtag group of Israelites, and yet he's bringing everything, and let's see what happens. Verse 10, when Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. So all we know at this point is the Israelites have been told, or at least Moses has been told, hey, by the way, Pharaoh's getting ready to come after you. He's going to chase you down, and I'm going to harden his heart, and that's it. I will get glory over him. We're not told how. We're not told in what way God's going to deliver them. And so you can imagine at this point, they are somewhat terrified. All we know is Pharaoh's coming after him. And now we turn around and look, and with tons of chariots coming, they're kicking up large clouds of dust. You're going to see them coming a long way off. Like, this is not, you don't move a huge band of chariots without someone seeing them coming. And Israel looks, they see them coming, they are terrified. And the people of Israel cried out to Yahweh. Once again, this word cried. They are afraid. They are looking for help. They're looking for assistance. Verse 11, they said to Moses, so you think it could take like a godly turn. Moses, tell God we need help. He saved us before. We believe that he can do it again. Cry out to God for us. That's not what they say. Verse 11, they said to Moses, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? So what do they think? We're toasted, right? Moses, you idiot. Moses, you're a terrible leader. Why did you call us out of slavery only so we could be killed in the desert? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians. So super quickly, right? They've just seen God do all these amazing things. They've just witnessed the death of the firstborn. They've just witnessed Pharaoh kicking them out and giving them, the people of Egypt, giving them tons of treasure. And immediately, as it were, they revert back to, why did we do this? Why did we leave? It was better to be enslaved and serve Pharaoh than to die in the wilderness. Those are the only two options they can see, is either death in the wilderness or slavery, and we pick slavery. And that's, in many ways, this will become the theme of the Israelites for the next season, is why didn't we stay in Egypt? And it kind of goes to show you how far and how quickly human hearts can turn, despite evidence. And that's kind of part of the point, is this is ridiculous. Who did God just do all this work to save? And what's their response? Immediately, as soon as danger comes, we're hopeless, we're helpless. They cry to Yahweh, but there is no sense here that they believe he's going to do anything. Last line, for it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. Verse 13, and Moses said to the people, fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. So Moses kind of, the language is somewhat harsh, and we're going to see this come out in the next line. It's like, stop being afraid. Stand still, meaning don't run around crazily, and watch. See the salvation of the Lord, which he will repeat. Meaning, okay, you're at a place, and obviously God has led you here into which only he can rescue here. And the idea is you're not equipped for battle. You aren't equipped in the sense of you guys are not ready to take on the heavy chariots, the heavy armor that the Egyptians are bringing. The only one who can save you is Yahweh. Verse 14. The Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. And the idea is this: you're seeing these people coming. Wait, you see them, but also you will see, notice the repetition of the word see, you will see Yahweh's salvation. And the Egyptians that you see right now, that you're looking at, you're seeing this army coming towards you, you will never see again. And it's a way to say, Israelites, wait, do look, do see what's coming, but no, they will be dealt with forever. This is it. This is the end game. Verse 14, the Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. The Lord will fight for you. This becomes a theme, especially huge in Samuel and Kings. That's that Yahweh is the one who fights battles. Yahweh is the one who defeats enemies. Yahweh is the one who brings victory. Kings don't trust in horses, in chariots, in the size of their army, but rather when they trust in Yahweh. Yahweh is the one who delivers. And there's this last line in verse 14, and the ESV makes it kind of sound nice. Other translations do too. You have only to be silent. When I feel like, and the commentaries bring this out, it's much more curt. It's more like, dude, shut up. Like, Yahweh will fight for you. Just shut up and sit still. Stop being crazy. Stand firm. Stand still. Shut up. Yahweh will rescue you. And you can almost get a sense of Moses' frustration with the people of like, are you kidding me? After all you've seen, do you not yet trust me? And some of you kind of experience like this. If you have kids, there's these moments in which you see the lack of trust that seems completely unreasonable with your children. At moments when you think, I've taken care of you, I've raised you since before you were conscious, you can trust me now just like you did before. And Moses is kind of saying the same thing, like, oh, come on. At this point, don't you think Yahweh's got something for you? So verse 15, the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry to me? And the you here is singular. And it's almost like Yahweh's pointing at Moses and being like, dude, now I've got an issue with you. Why are you crying out to me? Like, you should already know I've got this. So it's kind of it's like Moses rebukes the people, and then it's almost like Yahweh's rebuking Moses, saying, hey, come on. Kind of funny. Anyway, tell the people of Israel to go forward. Lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, so that the people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so that they shall go in after them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his host, his chariots and his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am Yahweh, when I have gotten glory over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. So this kind of section is pretty interesting. Like, the idea is that Pharaoh and his group is going to move in. They're going to come after them, but Yahweh's going to do something amazing. And you got to hear echoes of creation here with water being divided and dry land coming up. Like, this is Genesis 1 language. And it's almost like Yahweh is saying, I will essentially move in uncreation and do this thing where I will divide the water and I will make dry land. So it's almost like this is recreation part 2, right? So that the people of Israel may go through on dry land. So he's telling them now, this is what I'm going to do. Get ready. We're going to pause and end this section here, and we'll come back in just a second. Thanks. Okay, the second section kind of ends with, once again, the Egyptians shall know that I am Yahweh, and when I've gotten glory over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. So once again, Yahweh is trying to show, I have the power to trump what seems to be the power at the time. Pharaoh, chariots, horsemen, heavy hitters. I'm actually king. I have power over them. So then jumps into chapter 14, verse 19, and things go into motion. Then the angel of God, who is going before the host of Israel, moved and went behind them. So it moves from this huge cloud that's a cloud by day and then kind of a fireball cloud by night, literally moves around the Israelites and moves behind them. So now they have a rear guard. And the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them, coming between the host of Egypt and the host of Israel. So there's God himself now places his presence essentially as a barrier, as a rear guard between Israel and Egypt. And there was the cloud and the darkness, and it lit up the night without one coming near the other all night. So once again, there's this emphasis that we saw before of Israel is separated from the Egyptians by God himself. And the text here is kind of weird. It's a not a play on words, but it's almost as though, once again, like in the plagues, Israel is distinguished with light, and the idea is there's light in Israel, but Egypt just sees darkness. And I'm not sure how much to read into that, but the emphasis is on Yahweh's presence being the thing which protects and separates them from the Egyptians all night long. So Israel is entering the sea during night, and essentially night comes, the sea divides, Israel walks through. Verse 21, then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove back the sea by a strong east wind all night, and made the sea dry ground, and the waters were divided. Moses lifts up his hand, this huge wind starts, and it's as though it clears out the water in a clearly unusual way, right? So that ground opens up, waters divided. Once again, makes you think of creation when God divided the waters and brought out dry land. Verse 22, and the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on their right and on their left. So the word here, wall, can be used for a walled city, a city that is a fortress, that is protected from outside. And the idea is these waters that are fluid have now become essentially a solid point of almost a fortress-like surrounding of the Israelites. And the Israelites are walking through, and they're protected on the right and their left by water, and they're going straight through, and they're protected on their backside by Yahweh in this flaming cloud. They are totally protected. The Egyptians pursued them and went after them into the midst of the sea. So they're protected on the rear, but there's some way in which the Egyptians think, you know what, we are going after them, right? So they launch into the midst of the sea. All Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and horsemen. There's that repetition again. And in the morning watch, the Lord, in the pillar of fire and of cloud, looked down on the Egyptian forces and threw the Egyptian forces into a panic. So the night has gone by as Israel moves through. The Egyptians begin to follow them in. Morning begins to break. And Yahweh, in some way, looks down, sees this, and throws the Egyptian forces into a panic. We're not really sure what that means, except they become confused. Verse 25, clogging their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. We're not sure. This area is called not the Red Sea, but the Reed Sea. And the idea is that maybe there's seaweed that's getting stuck in the wheels. The wheels are coming off. Maybe it's mud. We're not sure which or what. But the chariot wheels, these things that should be the absolute death of Israel, the heaviest hitters that you can bring to bat, their wheels get stuck. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from before Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians. Egyptians realize this is supernatural. We are being attacked. We are being defeated. Let's get out of here. Once again, this is setting the stage for later kings, the later powers of Israel, to know that it is Yahweh that fights for them. Their hope and their defense is not, hey, we need better chariots, more armies. Not that that's in and of itself a bad thing, but we do not trust in those things. We have to trust in the presence of our God to save us. Verse 26, Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the water may come back on the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course when the morning appeared. So the idea is morning dawns, and at that moment the sea begins to fold in toward the Egyptians as they are chasing the Israelites. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea returned to its normal course when the morning appeared, and as the Egyptians fled into it, so the Egyptians are running basically into this wall of water that's coming toward them. It says they didn't just flee into it, but the Lord threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea. So I'm not sure what's being pictured here, but it is crazy. It's as though Yahweh picks them up and slams them into these walls of water, and they are covered up. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen. And of all the hosts of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea, not one of them remained. So Pharaoh is bringing this huge army, this host, this huge horde, his chariots, the heavy-duty battle tanks of the day, and they just get wiped out. They get covered up in water. They're useless. They are gone. But the people of Israel walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. So once again, there's a division, there's a separation. God has defeated the Egyptian strongest powers, and the Israelites are free. They are walking free. Verse 30. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Just calling out the fact that Yahweh saved Israel that day from the hand. So notice the term the hand or the power of the Egyptians. Those words kind of have similar meaning in the Hebrew. Yahweh saves them from the hand of the Egyptians. The Israelites who had seen these guys coming and who were told you'll never see them again, now see just dead bodies all over the shore. Verse 31. Israel saw the great power that the Lord had used against the Egyptians. The word power there is actually hand. So it's the same word talking about Yahweh saved them from the hand of the Egyptians. Israel sees the great hand or the great power of Yahweh. And so there's this contrast. Well, you've got on one side the power of the Egyptians, and on the other hand, the power of Yahweh. Those things are held in huge contrast. So the Israelites see this, and the people feared the Lord. They feared Yahweh, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. So once again, God's plan is not simply to rescue his people, but to let his people see it so that they will fear him. Not in a cowering sense, but in a sense of, ooh, this is a big God. This God is dangerous. This God not only can control plagues and control the course of events, but when this God chooses to, he can bring new creation. He can bring uncreation, and he can bring restored creation. This is the God. There's not one God among many gods. This is the God. And it talks about, it's kind of funny, and they believed in Yahweh and in his servant Moses. And you can kind of see a parallel here to the way the New Testament talks about Jesus, and that by believing in Israel's God, the God of, as it were, the Old Testament, same God of the New Testament, except the idea is that his servant Jesus is revealed, and that you cannot trust in Yahweh without trusting in his servant. Those things are inseparable, and it's something to think about. As Israel comes to trust and follow God's leader Moses, they're also doing the same for Yahweh. So that'll finish up this section. We're going to jump into some questions here in just a second, and then we'll be done. Let's ask a couple questions, and then we'll finish this and get ready to discuss on Sunday. First off, one of the things we see here that's important to discuss is how easy it is for Israel, after having seen God do supernatural things, just amazing things with the plagues, amazing thing with the weather, all these amazing things, amazing acts against these other, the gods of Egypt, against Pharaoh. Then they're faced with a terrifying situation, and immediately they revert back to, as it were, unbelief, desperation, not trusting Moses, not trusting Yahweh. And it's easy for us to think, man, these guys are idiots until you've been in that same kind of situation where things all of a sudden get rough and you begin hunting for someone to trust in, or you get terrified and you flip out. And so one of the questions I'd love to discuss is when maybe, if you want to be vulnerable, when have you struggled to trust the Lord? Even though you've seen him do great things in the past, has there been a time in recent memory when maybe what was once easy or was once made clear sense became an amazing struggle to trust in the Lord? Second thing to note, I think it makes an emphasis on this for a reason, but just speaking about carrying Moses grabbing Joseph's bones on the way out and carrying those to the land of Canaan. It's important to note that God always keeps his promises. Like, God is making a point here, I'm trustworthy, and the authors of the folks who are repeating the story to the next generation are saying, hey, remember, God keeps his promises. But it's also important to note, God doesn't always do that on his time. And oftentimes, his view of things is multi-generational. And it is easy for me, I think, as I consider myself to be young, as a young guy, to lose focus on the fact that God's purposes extend far further than just my lifetime. I can be pretty me-centric and pretty in my lifetime centric, and yet in Joseph's case, he's got a amazingly forward and backward view where he knows God's promises to Abraham, and yet he's also holding on the fact that those will not be fulfilled in his lifetime. And so he's looking forward hundreds of years and saying, hey, don't forget to take my bones with you when you leave, because God will be faithful. Interesting thing to think about. Third thing, are you good with God derailing your plans? Here, it seems as though Israel's headed out of Egypt, things are good, and suddenly, no, I want you to go to the specific place. You're going to back up against the sea, you're going to and camp, you're going to stay put for a while, and then, without telling you how I'm going to deal with them, all of Pharaoh's armies are going to come and attack you, and you aren't guaranteed, as it were, to know how things will play out. Are we good when God's plans seem to, I don't want to say derail, but seem to go far different than what our plans are? And are you good knowing and trusting God when you don't know how things will end or how they will even go? Kind of the last thing just want to talk about are one of the emphasis I think in this text is on Pharaoh's chariots, his horses, and his horsemen. And I think one of the reasons for those emphases is because that's going to be a huge issue for Israel later on. There's a couple points in which Israel is the powerhouse nation. Under David and Solomon, they become a pretty significant group to deal with. And a couple other kings later, they become a power. But the idea is Israel often trusts in her chariots, her horses, and her horsemen, her tanks, her superpowers, as it were. And it's easy for us. What things do you find yourself trusting in that are not Yahweh? What things, not just good things, like, yeah, obviously it's good to have money in the bank account, it's good to have a job, it's good to be in relationships, but how do we, like Israel will later on, and like Pharaoh does here, how do we trust in those kind of tangible things, and how does that trust at times conflict with trusting in Yahweh? A lot more to discuss. One last thing, and then we'll be done with this section. I'd encourage you, if you have time, read 1 Corinthians 10, 1 through 14. It's a really interesting commentary by Paul on this people that Yahweh has called out and redeemed and is leading through out of Egypt into the wilderness. And I'd love to discuss that some. So if you have time, read 1 Corinthians 10, 1 through 14, and let's look forward to discussing this on Sunday. Thanks for sticking with me, and I'll see you in just a couple days. Thanks. Bye.